My 48-year-old son poured boiling soup over my head and screamed that I had 5 minutes to leave his house, but he didn't know I was holding the deed. In that moment, the loving mama died, and the CEO who owned everything he cherished stood up, before continuing, "Write where you are from or what time it is." The phone on my side table, that beige rotary model older than my son, rang a second time. It was loud, shrill, and demanded attention. I was in my armchair, watching the dust motes dance in a sliver of Tuesday sunlight, a sliver that always reminded me how much life still existed in small things. I lifted the heavy receiver. "Praise the Lord," I said. My voice was a soft prayer that Darrell, my son, never heard. "Mama, you there?" His voice, Darrell's voice, was like cold oil, just as I remembered. Smooth on the surface, but with a thickness beneath it that gummed everything up. He never called just to say hello. A call from Darrell was a summons. "I'm here, son. How are you?" "Busy, Mama. Always busy." I heard the clink of ice and Tanisha's high-pitched, sharp laugh in the background. My daughter-in-law. The sound was always a chisel chipping away at whatever piece I had left. "Listen, Tanisha and I are having a special dinner this Sunday over at the house." He called it the house. The strong brick colonial built by my father's hands. The place I brought Darrell home from the hospital. The place I let them live rent-free for 15 years. It was supposed to be a foundation. It had become a crutch. "A special dinner," I repeated, keeping my voice quiet. "What's the occasion?" There was a pause. The clinking ice stopped. "Occasion? We don't need an occasion to see our own mother, do we?" His voice was suddenly slick with a false, practiced warmth. "Tanisha is making her famous roast. She wants it to be special, just for you." Tanisha's famous roast came in a foil tin from the most expensive caterer in town. I felt the Arctic cold settle in my chest, a familiar premonition I had learned to trust over 78 years. This was not a dinner. It was an ambush. "That's thoughtful of you, Darrell," I said, choosing my words with care. "So you'll be there. 6 o'clock. Don't be late, Mama. You know Tanisha likes to eat on time." He was already rushing me off the phone, his duty done. "I'll be there." "Good. And Mama." His voice dropped, taking on that weary, patronizing tone he used when he was about to be casually cruel. "Try to wear something nice. You know, Tanisha's friends might stop by." The line clicked dead. He was embarrassed by me. He saw my simple church dresses, my small, clean apartment, my old phone, and he saw a poor, aging woman. He never once stopped to ask why I lived simply. He never asked where the money came from for his prep school, his first car, or the seed money for the business he was now running into the ground. He just took. I replaced the receiver. My quiet Tuesday was over. I looked at the old leather bag on the floor by my chair, the one I had carried for 20 years. It was more than a purse. It was my briefcase. Inside, I knew, was a folder holding the original deeds, the trust agreements, and the bank signatory cards. It held the truth. I had hoped I would never have to open that folder again. I had prayed Darrell would one day wake up and see the value of a life built on dignity, not on shine. I reached for the small, heavy safe hidden behind the loose baseboard of my closet. I opened it and pulled out the folder. It was thick, worn, and secured with a single simple brown rubber band. I ran my fingers over it. This was no longer about a family dinner. This was about an ending, and I needed to make sure the ending was on my terms. I needed leverage. My mind went straight to the property management company, MJ Legacy Holdings, the business I had gifted him. I knew its weakness. I pulled up my old banking console on the computer, the one Darrell didn't know existed. I had remote access to the public county records. A quick cross-reference confirmed the icy dread in my gut. The company was 3 months behind on its property taxes. The delinquency notices were forwarded directly to my private P.O. box, ensuring Darrell and Tanisha were blissfully unaware. He was bragging about Dubai, while I was quietly keeping the lights on. It wasn't just greed, it was incompetence. I printed the latest tax delinquency notice. I slipped it into the Cedarwood Trust folder. The house was secured. The business was already compromised. Now I needed to check Tanisha's weak point, her boutique. I pulled up the commercial lease agreement for her style, the imported clothes store. The lease was not in her name. It was in the name of the LLC that owned the building. An LLC I owned, leased by MJ Legacy Holdings. My blood ran cold again, but this time not from premonition, but from tactical clarity. Tanisha was 6 weeks late on her rent. I knew that too because Darrell's office manager, a woman I paid handsomely, forwarded me the accounting reports. They had built a fragile, glittering life on a foundation of debt and delayed consequences, all because they believed the woman in the simple dress was too old and too stupid to notice. I picked up the beige receiver again and called my attorney, Mr. Evans. It was late, but he always answered. Mr. Evans, it's Mabel. I need a contingency filed first thing Thursday morning. The Cedarwood Trust contingency? Yes. I need the emergency revocation of the provisional caretaker agreement for Mabel J, and a freeze on MJ Legacy Holdings corporate accounts for any withdrawal over $1,000. Do not proceed until I give the final word Sunday at 6:05 p.m. The line was silent for a moment. Mrs. Johnston, are you sure? That's everything. I am certain, I said. The word was cold and final. My son has booked a ticket to his own reckoning. I just need to be there to punch it. I hung up, the feeling of absolute control settling over me. The papers were ready. The legal mechanism was a loaded spring. I would not bring a fight to the house. I would bring the detonation. I just had to survive the next 3 days. Thursday morning, I cut the coupons for the week, went to church to help clean the altar linens, and then walked 2 blocks to Mr. Evans's office, my old leather bag heavy in my hand. I told him I needed the final documents executed, not filed, just executed, signed, and dated. He was concerned, his forehead lined with professional worry. Mrs. Johnston, if you sign these, Darrell's rights as provisional caretaker are revoked the moment they are notarized. He is legally a trespasser after a short notification period. Then let's notarize them, I said, sliding the documents, the updated revocation of the caretaker agreement, and the bank freeze order across his glass desk. The cold glass was sterile, unlike the warm mahogany I grew up with. I need the paperwork to be flawless. I need the threat of the law to be immediate. I signed my name, Mabel J, on the signature line. My hand was steady. It didn't tremble, even though I was signing away my last thread of hope for my son. The notary stamped the documents. The thud of the rubber stamp hitting the paper was the most final sound in the world. It was the sound of a coffin closing on the spoiled boy I used to know. I paid the filing fee of $800 in cash, ignoring Mr. Evans's surprised look. I am Mabel J, I thought. My world is global. The fee was a small price for the perfect timing I needed. I placed the originals back in the folder and the folder back in my bag. I had created the leverage. Now I just needed the trigger. The rest of the day, the air felt charged. Friday, I volunteered at the church's soup kitchen. I thought of Tanisha's single scallop dinners and Darrell's bragging. I ladled thick vegetable soup into bowls, thinking how different this heat was. The heat of nourishment, the heat of prayer, from the heat they were planning to deliver. Saturday arrived, humid and heavy. I stayed home. I pulled out my simple beige polyester dress. It was clean, pressed, but shapeless. It was the dress of a woman who had given up. They wanted me to look like a beggar, and I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would be the drab gray background that made their gaudy colors look even brighter. Sunday morning, I sat in my usual pew, third from the front on the aisle. The sermon was on the prodigal son. I prayed for Darrell, not for his return, but for his soul. I knew he was coming home, but only to kick me out. The afternoon dragged. At 5:30 p.m., I picked up my handbag. I did not call a cab. They would have seen that as an extravagance. No, I took the number 12 bus, just as I always did. The bus groaned and hissed its way across town from my quiet, older neighborhood. I owned the building I lived in. I owned the bus depot. I owned the land under the very bank Darrell used. I sat on the hard plastic seat, my spine straight, watching my city slide by. When I stepped off the bus, the air was thicker, almost suffocating. It was a 10-minute walk to the house. I walked slowly, my old knees aching, but my resolve hardening with every step. I saw the house from the end of the street, a strong brick-faced colonial meant for generations. But the rot was visible. The flower beds my mother had tended were choked with weeds. And there, in the driveway, sat a brand new, gleaming black luxury sedan, a ridiculous oversized machine that cost more than most people's homes. Darrell's boast on the phone was true. I walked up the path and rang the bell. I heard shouting inside, Tanisha's high-pitched laugh. Seconds passed. I rang again. Finally, the door was pulled open. Tanisha stood there, framed in the doorway. She was a living embodiment of cheap perfume and expensive bad taste. Tight red leopard print dress, gold hoops the size of my fist swinging from her ears. Her acrylic nails, at least 3 inches long, clicked impatiently against the phone in her hand. "Oh, you're here," she said. Her smile was a grimace. She didn't move. She just looked me up and down, her eyes scanning my beige dress, my scuffed shoes, my old bag. Her nose wrinkled, a tiny involuntary show of pure disgust. "Oh, Mama," she said, her voice dripping with false pity. "You really wore that?" I told Darrell we were having company. My gaze met hers. Darrell said a special dinner, just for me. "Yes, well," she waved a dismissive, jewel-encrusted hand. "Friends are stopping by. We're social." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open for me to follow, like a servant. "Wipe your feet. I just had these floors done." I stepped inside. The air smelled wrong, full of chemical polish and Tanisha's perfume. The heavy oak door thudded shut behind me. I had crossed the line. I was on enemy soil. "Darrell!" Tanisha shrieked, her voice echoing off the new cold marble floors. "Your mother's here, and you won't believe what she's wearing." I followed the sound of her clicking heels into the dining room. I had to stop in the doorway. My breath caught, not from awe, but from sacrilege. They had destroyed it. This room, the heart of our family, was gone. The warm, soft yellow walls, the dark, polished mahogany, all replaced by a monstrosity of stark white and blinding, sterile white marble. In the center, a gigantic dining table made of a single slab of glass, balanced on a tangle of twisted, gold-plated metal. A crystal chandelier dripped with garish, oversized prisms. "It's Italian," Tanisha said, noticing my silence. She ran a long nail along the back of a white leather chair. "Imported. Cost more than your entire apartment." "I bet," I said. I let my eyes move, taking in the details. The room was a stage set for shallow people. "It's bright. It's modern, Mama," Darrell said, walking in from the kitchen. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a silk tracksuit that shimmered under the harsh lights. A thick gold chain rested on his chest. He kissed my cheek, a dry, quick peck. Tanisha has incredible taste. She's got an eye for quality. Of course, I said softly. I sat down at the chair he pointed to, at the far end of the glass table. It was cold and uncomfortable. I placed my old black bag on the floor by my feet. Darrell took the seat at the head of the table. Tanisha sat at the other end, leaving us separated by a sterile football field of glass. So, Mama, Darrell began, swirling a dark liquor in his glass. Tanisha hadn't offered me anything. How's retirement? Still clipping coupons? They shared a snicker. I keep busy, I said. Church, my garden. That's nice. He snapped his fingers, and Tanisha immediately poured him a refill from a bar cart covered in gold chrome. It was an appalling display of servitude and entitlement. Business is booming, he announced, his voice getting louder. He was performing. Just closed a massive deal. We're thinking of buying a second car. Something for me to pop around town in, Tanisha purred. A convertible, white with red leather seats. And we're booking a trip, Darrell continued, his voice hitting a false high note. Dubai, first class all the way. You can't put a price on living your best life, Mama. You should try it sometime. I looked at him. 48 years old, but he looked like a spoiled child. He was bragging about a trip, a car, a booming business, and I knew for a fact that MJ Legacy Holdings was 3 months delinquent on its property taxes. The paperwork was sitting in my lap. That sounds expensive, I said. Tanisha let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. That's rich people's talk, Mama. Expensive, affordable. We don't think like that. We see what we want and we get it. Of course, I said, sipping the water they had grudgingly provided. But you must be careful, son. Debt is a cruel master. Darrell slammed his glass on the table. The glass rang like a bell. Debt? Who said anything about debt? I'm talking about investments, assets, things you wouldn't understand, Mama. Your world is laundromats and rent checks. My world is global. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed. He was building his case, trying to convince himself as much as me. The meal arrived, plates with tiny artful smears of sauce, a single scallop, and 3 asparagus spears. Food designed to be photographed, not eaten. Darrell ate his in 2 bites. I ate slowly, methodically. I would give them no complaint. My quiet dignity infuriated them. They wanted me to be impressed or small. My passivity was unnerving them. I had placed my old leather bag on the floor by my feet, tucked away. Darrell, getting up to pour himself a 3rd glass of whiskey, didn't even look down. He stumbled, his foot catching the strap. My bag flew across the white marble floor. My life scattered across the sterile white. My old coin purse, a half-used tube of hand lotion, a tin of peppermint candies, my keys, a church bulletin, and, of course, the thick, worn file folder held together by a simple brown rubber band. Oh, Darrell snarled, annoyed at the interruption. Mama, why do you put that old junk right in the way? Tanisha laughed. Darrell, look, she still has those hard candies. I thought only grandmas in cartoons did that. Darrell nudged the file folder with the toe of his expensive shoe. What's this, Mama? More coupons? Or your will? Leaving me all your porcelain cats? He roared at his own joke. I didn't answer. Slowly, deliberately, I bent down. My knees cracked in protest. The floor was cold. I began to gather my things. I picked up the mints, the keys, the bulletin. Then I reached for the folder. Darrell's shoe was still on it. Excuse me, Darrell, I said softly. He moved his foot. I picked up the folder, ran my hand over the cover, wiping away the black smudge his shoe had left. I checked that the rubber band was secure. I put it back in my bag, zipped it closed, and placed it in my lap. I would not put it on the floor again. I returned to my seat. I had refused to break. I had refused to be humiliated without complaint. I had somehow, by cleaning up my own mess, humiliated them instead. Tanisha threw her napkin down. "I'm done. This is boring." She glared at Darrell. "Didn't you have something you wanted to talk to your mother about?" Darrell, who had been glowering at me, suddenly straightened. A new, ugly energy entered his eyes. Yeah, I did." Tanisha stood up. "Actually, Mama, since you're just sitting there, make yourself useful. Clear these plates." She smiled, a wide shark-like smile. This was the test. I was not a guest. I was the help. Darrell watched me, a smirk on his lips. I stood up. My knees protested again. "Of course, dear," I said to Tanisha. I picked up my own plate, then Darrell's, then Tanisha's. I held a stack of heavy, expensive china. They were heavy, but I had carried far heavier burdens. I carried them into the kitchen. It was the one room they hadn't completely ruined, but it was a mess. Foil containers and catering boxes piled everywhere. I scraped the plates into the trash and set them by the sink. The waste was criminal. When I returned to the dining room, they were whispering. They stopped the moment I entered. The new, giddy, cruel light was back in their eyes. I was weak. I was a servant. I would do as I was told. They had just passed sentence on themselves. "Sit down, Mama," Darrell said, his voice now full of a false booming authority. "Tanisha and I have a surprise for you." A sick, nervous energy filled the room. Tanisha squealed, clapping her hands together, the sound like two sharp bones striking each other. She hurried back into the kitchen. I heard the clank of a pot, the whoosh of a gas stove being lit. A moment later, I smelled it. Not a home-cooked aroma. It was the tiny, overly salty, artificial smell of canned chicken noodle soup. My blood went arctic cold. Tanisha came back out, walking with a theatrical slowness. She was carrying a large, brand-new, gaudy soup tureen, white porcelain painted with gold cherubs. It was steaming. She placed it on the glass table with a heavy, deliberate thud. "It's just, well, Mama, you're looking a little stale," Tanisha said, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You're stuck in the past. That beige dress, that old bag, that dusty apartment. You need something to freshen you up." She was holding her phone low, recording. Darrell stood up. He cracked his knuckles. A slow, deliberate sound. He was proving to Tanisha that he was the alpha, the man of the house, that he had his pathetic old mother completely under his thumb. "That's right," Darrell said, his voice a low, ugly growl. He stepped over to the tureen. "We thought you needed a wake-up call, a little zest." He put his hands on the handles of the tureen. I looked at him, the man I had funded. His face was twisted into a mask of ugly, childish cruelty. He was really doing this. I did not brace. I did not beg. I did not move a single muscle. I just watched. I thought of my failure. I had protected him from every sting, and he had grown up to become this monster in a silk tracksuit. "Darrell has a special surprise for you, Mama," Tanisha whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "Open your eyes, Mama." "Time for your bath," Darrell sneered. He lifted the tureen. There was no flicker of doubt in his eyes, only the ugly, focused glee of a bully. He dumped the entire contents over my head. The world exploded. First, the thick, viscous slosh, followed by the splatter of liquid hitting my shoulders and the marble floor. Then, the shock of the heat. It was scalding, a sudden, terrifying pain that seared my scalp. They had heated it to boiling. The thick, greasy liquid ran down my face, into my eyes, instantly blinding me with a salty, stinging film. Noodles and mushy, square-cut carrots slapped against my cheeks, clung to my hair, and slid down my front. I gasped, choking on the artificial smell of chicken broth and sodium. I sat there, frozen, the tureen now empty in his hands. He tossed it onto the table where it clattered on the glass. My vision, blurred by the greasy orange film, slowly cleared. I blinked, and a single overcooked noodle fell from my eyelashes onto my cheek. The pain was real, but it was nothing compared to the humiliation. The laughter began, a high-pitched, ugly titter from Tanisha, then Darrell's explosion, a loud, braying belly laugh. You look pathetic, old woman," he roared, pointing at me. The laughter severed the last thread of maternal obligation. The part of me that was soft, forgiving Mama Mabel, was gone, burned away by the heat and the cruelty. The part that was left was Mabel J., the woman who had faced down bankers and built an empire from nickels and dimes. I sat perfectly still. I let them laugh. They had just sealed their own fate, and they were celebrating it. They were laughing at their own funeral. Darrell finally caught his breath, his laughter tapering off into satisfied, wheezing coughs. He looked at me, a conqueror. He tossed a silk handkerchief onto the table. It was a gesture of ultimate, final dismissal. He pointed a long, lazy finger at me, his face still flushed with the high of his own cruelty. "All right, Mama, show's over." His voice was flat, hard, and cold as the marble floor. "You've got 5 minutes to get out." The words hung in the air, sharp and clear. 5 minutes. The specificity of it was a calculated act of termination. "You heard me," he snarled. "Get out. We're done with you. We're done with this whole charade." Tanisha stepped forward, her face a mask of smug victory. "This poor, humble mama act? We're tired of it. We're selling the house. We're moving to a penthouse downtown. And you," Darrell said, stopping to point at me again, "are not part of those plans. We're putting you in a home. Bright Shores facility. We've already picked it out." I knew Bright Shores facility. It was a concrete block on the bad side of town. "You can't just," I started. "I can what?" he snapped. "This is my house, Mama. I've let you keep your name on the papers for tax reasons or whatever. But my lawyer says it's time. We're forcing a sale. You can take your little share, or we can fight you in court and prove you're incompetent." He sneered, looking at me, dripping with noodles. "That won't be hard to do." "You look insane." He looked at his gaudy, oversized watch. "Your 5 minutes are ticking. I'd get started if I were you." I slowly lifted my head. I looked at him, not as a mother, but as a predator looks at a very, very stupid animal that has just cornered itself. Slowly, deliberately, I wiped the greasy film of broth from my eyes. Darrell's smile began to falter. My stillness was unnerving him. My first move was to attend to my bag. With a steady, deliberate motion, I lifted the heavy, wet leather bag from my lap and placed it on the dining room table. It landed on the pristine, $10,000 Italian glass with a wet, sickening thud. A small puddle of orange-gray soup immediately formed around it. "My table! You filthy!" Tanisha let out an involuntary shriek. I ignored her. I unzipped the main compartment. The zipper made a loud, rasping sound. I reached in and pulled out the file folder. I placed the damp folder on the table next to the bag. What are you doing?" Darrell stammered. I calmly, methodically slipped the rubber band off the folder. I folded it neatly and placed the small square on the table. Then I opened the folder. "You're right," I said. My voice was my boardroom voice. Low, clear, cold as the grave. 5 minutes, then everything you think you own is gone. The blood drained from Darrell's face. "You said this is your house," I continued. I slid the first document across the glass. A bold move for a man who is legally a tenant. Darrell snatched the paper. Tanisha crowded behind him. It's the deed, he whispered, his eyes scanning it wildly. It's the deed to the house. Indeed it is, I said. Now look for your name. You won't find it. You're looking for Mabel Johnston. You won't find that either. I leaned forward, the soup dripping from my chin onto the glass. My father and I set up a legal structure in 1993 after your father passed. It's called the Cedarwood Trust. This house, Darrell, is held by that trust. I am the sole trustee. Do you know what you are? He just stared at me. You are the provisional caretaker, I said. You are permitted to reside here at the sole discretion of the sole trustee. That's me. And my discretion has just run out. No, Tanisha whimpered, backing away. He's your son. You wouldn't. He was my son when he was invited to dinner. He was my son when he mocked my clothes. But when he poured boiling soup on his mother's head and laughed, he became a liability. And I, my dear, am very, very good at solving problems. Darrell was shaking his head over and over. The proceeds of any sale, I continued, belong 100% to the Cedarwood Trust. You have zero equity. You have zero claim. I pulled out the next document, the lease agreement for the new black luxury sedan in the driveway. Item 2, the car. The lease is not Darrell Johnston. It is Mabel Properties, LLC, my holding company. You are listed as a permitted driver, a privilege I will be revoking in about 10 minutes when I call the leasing agency and the police. You will leave the keys on this table. His head dropped. Item 3, your booming business, MJ Legacy Holdings. I pulled out the articles of incorporation. I'm the majority shareholder. You are the president, on a salary, I might add, that I will terminate effective immediately for cause. Assaulting the majority shareholder with hot soup is excellent cause. You are fired. No, Mama, please. I turned to Tanisha. The matter of your boutique, her style. 6 weeks late on your rent. I own the building. Consider this your formal 30-day notice of eviction. I will expect the keys and the back rent by the 1st of the month. Tanisha made a small choking sound and slid down the wall, sobbing. And finally, I said, pulling out the last document, the bank signatory card for his corporate accounts. Any withdrawal over $1,000 requires 2 signatures, mine and yours. I will not be signing any more checks, Darrell. You are frozen. You are locked out. I put my hands flat on the table. The folder was empty. You don't own the house you're in. You don't own the car you drive. You don't own the business you run. You don't even own your wife's store. You own nothing. I stood up. You are a child, living in his mother's house, playing with his mother's toys. And you just poured soup on my head. Mama, I'm sorry. It was Tanisha. She told me to. Darrell was crying, his face crumbling. Do not, I said, my voice so low and cold it scared even me. Ever call me that again. Mama is dead. She died when you picked up that tureen. My name is Mrs. Johnston, and you, sir, are trespassing. I pointed to the front door. Your 5 minutes started when I opened this folder. That was 4 minutes ago. 60 seconds to get out. That broke the spell. Tanisha scrambled to her feet, grabbing her phone and purse. Darrell, move. He stumbled, looking at me one last time, his face a mask of utter ruin. Get out, I said. He turned, and they ran, pushing and tripping over each other, desperate to get out of the house. I heard the front door crash open, their feet scrambling on the stone path, and Tanisha scream a curse into the humid night air. Then silence. I stood there, covered in filth, but utterly free. I was Mabel J. I looked at my watch. It was 6:04 p.m. 1 minute early. The phone on the nearby gold bar cart rang. Not the beige rotary, but the house line. I hadn't heard that number ring in 15 years. I reached for the receiver. The name flashing on the screen was Bright Shores Facility. I stood in the grotesque silence of the dining room, the chicken broth from my hair dripping onto the glass table. My fingers were still tacky when I picked up the house phone. The number flashing on the screen was Bright Shores Facility, the place Darrell and Tanisha had selected for my disposal. I let it ring once more before I answered. "This is Mrs. Johnston," I said. My voice was tight and cold, utterly lacking the warmth they had tried to mock out of me. "Mrs. Johnston, we've been trying to reach your son, Mr. Johnston. We're confirming the intake appointment for your transfer. He booked it for Tuesday morning." The voice was slick, professional, and oblivious to the chaos they had just caused. "That appointment is canceled," I stated. "I am the owner of the residence, and Mr. Johnston is no longer associated with the decision-making process." I was talking in lawyer code, the language of absolute control. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The account is under his name. He signed the deposit check." "I own the bank account that deposit check came from," I countered, running a hand over the file folder on the table. "You can expect a full reversal of funds and a formal letter from my legal team confirming that Darrell Johnston is no longer my authorized representative. Do not contact me again." I hung up before she could reply. The confrontation, my sudden appearance, covered in soup, destroying their plans, had been electric. Now came the financial cleanup. I had promised Darrell the lockout was immediate. I had 10 minutes before I needed to make those key calls. I walked over to the hideous gold bar cart. Tanisha's purse, a cheap knockoff of a French brand, was sitting on top. She had snatched it in her panic, but left her keys for the car, and the house scattered on the table. Darrell's wallet was nowhere to be seen, but I knew his corporate credit cards were tied to the frozen MJ Legacy Holdings account. I picked up the house keys. The metal was cold. I felt a quick, sharp stab of satisfaction that tasted like bitter broth. I returned to my bag and pulled out my other phone, my small functional satellite phone, only for emergencies. First, the car. I dialed the leasing agency for the black luxury sedan. "This is Mrs. Johnston, Mabel J. I'm the lesser of vehicle ID, redacted. I need to report the driver, Darrell Johnston, as unauthorized and terminate his permissive use immediately for cause." The agent stammered, confused by the speed and terminology. I used my low, clear boardroom voice. "The vehicle is currently parked in the driveway of the property at the house address. I need it towed and secured within the hour. If there is any resistance, please involve local law enforcement and refer them to my legal counsel, Mr. Evans. I sign, the lease is severed." The agent, hearing the mention of lawyers and police, clicked into action. The car, Darrell's crowning glory, was already gone. Next, the corporate accounts. I called the main branch of Riverbank, where I was a known client. I am the sole trustee of the Cedarwood Trust and majority shareholder of MJ Legacy Holdings. I am exercising my emergency signatory power. All corporate accounts are frozen for any withdrawal over $1,000. Yes, effective immediately. Send the confirmation of lockout to my P.O. box. I disconnected and leaned against the marble table. The heat on my scalp and neck was an angry, throbbing ache. I lifted my hand and saw the angry red skin. The real burn was the one I was about to deliver. I had chosen the pain to deliver the consequence. I dialed Mr. Evans again. "It's done. Darrell and Tanisha have vacated the house. They are trespassers. I need you to file the emergency revocation of the caretaker agreement now." "I'm on it, Mrs. Johnston. But they didn't leave any personal effects behind. They left what they were wearing, 2 purses, and a very expensive mess," I said, looking at the puddle of soup. "They also left the keys to the vehicle I just reported stolen." "Stolen? Unauthorized use. Same difference when the police are involved." And Mr. Evans, I strongly suspect Tanisha was recording the incident on her phone. I need a protective order filed immediately to seize and preserve that video as evidence of assault and elder abuse. That footage is the key to locking down their story. I sign. The fee hits my card. I hung up, feeling the finality of the legal moves. They had planned to put me away. I had just handed them a legal file. I had removed access, frozen the money, and put their reputation at risk. I walked through the house, my own house, checking the rooms. The house was quiet now, the expensive marble radiating the emptiness of their lives. I looked out the dining room window. A large flatbed tow truck was pulling into the driveway, hooking up the gleaming black luxury sedan. Darrell's prize was being hauled away. The tow truck's horn gave a short, sharp honk. It was a signal of final, hard-earned victory. I turned around to face the grotesque room. I had secured my perimeter, but I knew Darrell and Tanisha were running on pure terror now. They would not stay silent. I needed to call the police myself, preemptively, to report the assault before they used the video against me. I was Mrs. Johnston now, and the battle had just moved from the dining room to the courts. The city police arrived 20 minutes later, 2 officers looking thoroughly confused by the brick colonial address and the sight of a woman in a soggy beige dress with noodles in her hair. Mrs. Johnston? The younger officer asked, looking from me to the spilled soup on the glass table. Yes, I am the owner and resident of this property. I just experienced a felony assault, and I have reported a vehicle as unauthorized, which is currently being towed from my driveway. I spoke plainly, using legal terms only when necessary. Assault, ma'am? I pointed to the tureen on the table. My son, Darrell Johnston, and his wife, Tanisha, poured boiling hot soup over my head. I have first-degree burns on my scalp and neck. I lifted my hand to show the angry red skin. The officer's demeanor immediately changed. Safety check. Passed. He saw the physical cost. We received a call from a Mrs. Tanisha Johnston reporting an unhinged elderly woman assaulting her son and making threats, the officer said, pulling out a notepad. Of course they did, I said. They also recorded the entire incident on her phone. I have an attorney filing an order to preserve that footage, but it will clearly show Darrell committing the assault and Tanisha acting as an accessory. They also fled the scene because they were trespassing, which is tied to the emergency filing of this deed. I handed him a printed copy of the provisional caretaker revocation, signed by Mr. Evans. The officer looked at the legal paper, then at the soup puddle, then at the now empty driveway where the new sedan had been. The visual chaos aligned with my clear, calm narrative. He knew a genuine situation when he saw one. We'll need you to come down to the station to file a full report, Mrs. Johnston, the officer said. I'm unable to leave right now, I replied, moving to the foyer where my coat was. I need to secure this property and start the eviction process immediately, but I will cooperate fully tomorrow morning after I see a doctor. I let the officers secure the perimeter and file their initial report. Legal microcapsule. Police report filed. Their defense is compromised. I walked the officers to the door. Just as they were leaving, my beige rotary phone in the living room began to ring. I let it ring. The officers glanced at each other, acknowledging the jarring contrast of the old phone and the new marble. The next morning, the aching in my neck was dull but insistent. I dressed in a thick wool coat that hid the angry red welts. I made my way to Mr. Evans's office. He looked grim. They're not running, Mrs. Johnston. They're fighting. Of course they are. They have nothing left but bluster, I said, sitting down. They filed an emergency injunction late last night. They're claiming the Cedarwood Trust agreement is invalid because of undue influence, and they've accused you of filing a false police report and financial manipulation. They're using the video. They recorded themselves committing assault, then used the evidence of their crime to attack me? I lifted an eyebrow. Inverted evidence. Confirmed. Their lawyer, a Mr. Sinclair, Tanisha's cousin, I'm told, is framing it as a mental competency trap. He claims the soup incident was a clumsy attempt to clean you up, and your immediate hyper-competent legal response proves you set the whole thing up to seize their assets. The sheer audacity of the lie caused my jaw to lock. They're right about one thing, Mr. Evans. I did set it up. I set up the legal structure to protect my family legacy from precisely this kind of predictable greed. We need to establish your competency, Mrs. Johnston. That means a quick hearing, maybe a deposition. You have to be prepared to defend the Cedarwood Trust against claims of undue influence and prove you haven't been suffering from episodic delirium. Their words, not mine. This was the escalation. Financial Dodge Legal had jumped straight to public reputation. They were banking on the image of the soup-drenched old woman. I will not be using a beige polyester dress for this performance, I said. I'm calling in my markers. I want the judge to see Mabel J, CEO of MJ Legacy Holdings, not Mama Mabel, the Dowager. I immediately called my doctor and scheduled a mandatory burn treatment, ensuring there was an official medical record of the assault. Pain action rule, check. Medical record created, cost paid. And Mr. Evans, I added, standing up, before they try to spin the business, I need you to file suit against Darrell and Tanisha, personally, for the 3 months of delinquent property taxes he failed to pay, and the 6 weeks of rent Tanisha owes on the boutique. Hit them on everything. Don't let them have a moment to breathe. I walked out of the office. The sun was cold. I knew the next confrontation would not be in a dining room, but a public forum. I was no longer fighting for my home. I was fighting for my dignity and my legal identity. The beige dress was gone, replaced by a dark navy wool suit. I walked to my car, the solid, sensible sedan I actually owned, and headed toward the courthouse. The competency hearing was scheduled for Friday. I spent the intervening days compiling my evidence, aided by Mr. Evans. This was my world. Paperwork, documentation, and dismantling flawed arguments. Darrell's lawyer, Mr. Sinclair, had been aggressive, trying to paint a picture of a frail, confused matriarch who suddenly emerged in a moment of clarity to commit financial vengeance. I walked into the courtroom wearing my navy wool suit, the one Tanisha always sneered at for not being flashy enough. It was good wool. It was real. I carried my old leather bag, now clean, in my hand. Darrell and Tanisha were already there, sitting with Mr. Sinclair. Darrell looked pale and small in an ill-fitting suit. Tanisha was glaring at me, her face hard, but her eyes held a flicker of absolute terror. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Harrison, began the proceedings. Mr. Sinclair immediately launched into their narrative, using the word delirium 4 times in his opening statement. Your Honor, we have video evidence of a sudden, bizarre, and violent outburst by Mrs. Johnston, immediately followed by the complete destruction of her son's livelihood and assets. This is not sound legal reasoning. This is a senile episode being weaponized. My turn. Mr. Evans stood beside me. Your Honor, we welcome the video evidence. We do not dispute Mrs. Johnston's actions. We dispute the motive. The Cedarwood Trust was established 15 years ago to shield the family legacy from poor financial decisions. I stood and addressed the court directly, speaking in my steady, low tone. I am not suffering from delirium, Your Honor. I am suffering from first-degree burns and the painful realization that I enabled a lifetime of entitlement. I presented the proof, the Cedarwood Trust Agreement, 1993, signed and notarized, naming me as the sole trustee and Darrell as the provisional caretaker. The purpose, outlined in Article 7, was protection from financial imprudence. MJ Legacy, Holdings Delinquency Notices, forwarded to my P.O. Box, showing 3 months of unpaid property taxes. Evidence, the flaw was always present. The video. Judge Harrison ordered the video played. The courtroom went silent as Darrell, standing over me in his silk tracksuit, dumped the steaming tureen over my head. The camera captured Darrell's ugly laugh. It captured Tanisha's ecstatic, vicious glee. It captured the subsequent threats and the 5 minutes ultimatum. When the clip ended, the silence was deafening. I stepped forward. Your Honor, their attorney claims I used a moment of clarity to commit vengeance. I say I used a moment of clarity to commit self-defense. My son's cruelty was the final verification I needed to pull the trigger on a legal mechanism that has been in place for decades. I turned and looked at Darrell. His eyes were wide, hollow, and utterly broken. I had hoped to find a flicker of the boy who built me a crooked birdhouse at age 10. I found only ruin. I had hoped, even after he kicked my bag with his expensive shoe, even after he mocked my life, that he would stop before he crossed the final line, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the room. When he poured boiling soup on his mother's head and laughed, he made the decision for me. I did not seize his assets. I revoked his privileges. Judge Harrison looked down at the documents, then at the couple. Mr. Johnston, Ms. Johnston, the video evidence shows, at minimum, a physical assault, and, given the financial circumstances presented, a clear attempt at coercion and potential elder abuse. Given the original intent of the Cedarwood Trust, the court finds Mrs. Johnston's actions were rational, legally sound, and necessary to protect the assets of the trust. The emergency injunction is denied. The paper is law. I win the competency battle. I looked at Darrell one last time. You are fired. You are evicted. You are finished. You did it to yourself. They stumbled out of the courtroom, utterly stripped of everything. The fight had cost me my privacy and my last maternal hope, but I had secured my dignity and my legacy. The legal victory was absolute. The court denied Darrell's injunction, upheld the Cedarwood Trust, and confirmed my right as sole trustee to revoke the provisional caretaker status. Darrell and Tanisha were ordered to cooperate with the immediate eviction and collection of their sparse personal belongings. Mr. Evans had secured the order to seize and preserve Tanisha's phone. The video, once their weapon, was now the strongest evidence against them, permanently archived as proof of assault and malice. The week after the hearing was spent handling the consequences. I initiated the sale of the house. I oversaw the liquidation of MJ Legacy Holdings, recouping the lost revenue from the 3 months of unpaid taxes. I canceled Tanisha's lease on the boutique and found a new, more responsible tenant. The day I returned to the house for the first time, the atmosphere was different. The gold-plated monstrosities remained, the glass table, the chrome bar cart, but the sense of oppressive entitlement was gone. The air was merely still. I had hired a moving service to pack Darrell and Tanisha's things. When they finished, I walked through the empty rooms. In the dining room, the large, sterile space felt vast and meaningless without their greed filling it. I did not keep the expensive furniture, the white leather chairs, the glass table. They were the symbols of the sickness. I had them donated, along with the gold-plated tureen, to a consignment auction, with the proceeds going to the church's soup kitchen. The very soup that had burned me would now feed the hungry. I kept only 2 things: the small frayed braided rag rug my mother had made, still on the entryway floor, and the crooked birdhouse Darrell had built at age 10. I put the birdhouse on the mantelpiece, a silent memorial to the son I had lost. I had chosen bittersweet victory. I had secured my financial future and dignity at the cost of the relationship with my only child. I sat in the middle of the empty dining room, my cleaned leather bag resting in my lap. I had signed the last papers, formally dissolving Darrell's connection to all my properties. He and Tanisha were gone, having moved in with Tanisha's mother, forced to face the harsh reality of life without my silent allowance. I had one final duty. I picked up the house phone and called the Bright Shores facility again. "Hello, this is Mrs. Johnston, Mabel J. "Oh, Mrs. Johnston, we canceled that intake for Tuesday." "I know. I'm calling because I received an itemized invoice for the deposit. I noticed the charge was for a private wing, not the standard shared room. Can you confirm the total amount of the deposit Darrell Johnston paid?" She confirmed the high amount. "Thank you," I said. "I'll be calling the police with the details shortly. Given that Darrell Johnston has been proven to have financially coerced me, and given the court's finding of elder abuse, that deposit was likely paid with stolen funds from the MJ Legacy Holdings account before the freeze. You may want to retain a lawyer, as those funds will be subject to clawback." I hung up. Even their escape route, the planned cost of my institutionalization, would now be used against them. The price of their cruelty would be steep and long-lasting. I stood up. The silence was not empty. It was full of possibilities. I owned the house, my name, and my peace. I was Mabel J. I walked out of the house and carefully wiped my feet on my mother's rag rug. I closed the door behind me. I walked to my own car, the sensible one, and drove back to my small, clean apartment. I opened the door, and the sunlight streamed through the old lace curtains. I sat in my armchair, the one I owned, and picked up my Bible. I hadn't been reading, but I looked down at the page. My hands, old, wrinkled, and strong, were resting on the open book. The weight was gone. The burden of the son I had spoiled was finally lifted. I closed the Bible and sighed. It was the deepest, most relaxing exhale I had taken in 30 years. I was covered in filth only a few days ago, but now I was utterly free. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.